It started with a whisper among hikers, just a passing tale, told around crackling campfires deep in the Appalachian Mountains. A hiker had vanished. Not just lost or injured, but completely disappeared. No trace, no gear, not even footprints leading away from the trail. Her name was Emily Reese, a solo adventurer with years of experience and a deep love for the mountains. In the summer of 2019, she set off on a solo trek through the dense forests of the Appalachians and never came back. Her last known location was near an old, overgrown trail just south of a region known for its unusual rock formations and deep, narrow caves. Rescue teams searched for weeks. Drones were flown, dogs were brought in, even helicopters scanned the terrain, but nothing turned up. Just silence. Over time, most people assumed the worst. That she had fallen, gotten lost, or been taken by nature's unpredictable hand. But for some, especially her family and close friends, the story never sat right. Emily wasn't reckless. She followed protocol, left detailed trail maps behind, and checked in regularly. Her sudden disappearance, without a single clue, gnawed at those who knew her best. Still, as the months turned into years, the world slowly forgot. The trail reclaimed her story like it had reclaimed her footsteps until 6 years later, when something strange happened. A group of modern-day explorers, a mix of hikers and amateur researchers, decided to revisit the area where Emily was last seen. They weren't looking for her specifically. In fact, their journey started out of curiosity. Rumors had resurfaced online, people speaking in quiet corners of the internet about odd electromagnetic activity in the region. Some had posted strange compass malfunctions, unexplained sounds, and feelings of disorientation near certain cave systems deep in the forest. One user even claimed their drone's battery died instantly when approaching a dark opening in the ground. It sounded like urban legend stuff, but this group wanted to see it for themselves. They brought standard hiking gear, but also some unusual tools: EMF meters, signal detectors, and thermal cameras. They set up base near a thick patch of woods where GPS signals were notoriously weak. After several days of hiking and gathering data, one of their meters spiked, and unusually high magnetic field readings were picked up just outside a nearly hidden cave entrance. It wasn't marked on any of the local maps, and it looked barely large enough for a person to crawl into. The air around it was strangely still, and even the birds seemed to avoid it. But the most startling part came when one of the explorers checked their audio equipment. Through the static and environmental noise, a faint but rhythmic pulse could be heard. It was almost like a signal repeating in strange intervals. At first, they thought it was interference, maybe even a nearby electrical source. But out here, miles from civilization, there shouldn't have been anything like that. One of the explorers, a woman named Rachel, was the first to bring up Emily Reese. She had remembered the story from years ago and even pulled up old articles that mentioned a possible connection to the same region. She noticed something odd. Emily's last known GPS ping was just a few hundred meters from where they were now standing. That's when the mood shifted. What had started as a curiosity-driven expedition now felt more personal, more urgent. Could this signal be connected to her? Was it possible that after all this time, someone or something was still down there? They decided to investigate the cave more closely. Cameras were set up. One explorer even slid partially inside the cave to test the air quality and visibility. The walls were narrow and covered in moss. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the strange signal grew stronger. At one point, a piece of equipment, an EMF meter, spiked so sharply it shut off. When turned back on, it displayed strange symbols instead of readings. That same night, Rachel reviewed their thermal footage and saw something that made her stop cold. A heat signature, brief but real, moving deeper inside the cave, long after the others had stepped away. It didn't match any known animal shape, and it was too big to be just a trick of light or temperature shift. None of them could sleep well that night. The forest felt heavier, quieter than usual. A few members of the team wanted to pack up and leave, nervous about pushing too far into something they didn't understand. But Rachel couldn't walk away. Not now. Something was down there. And if there was even the smallest chance that Emily Reese had survived or had left behind something waiting to be found, they had to keep going, as dawn broke. They made a plan to return to the cave entrance with more gear and possibly send a small drone inside. But just as they were preparing, one of their radios crackled with a strange noise none of them had heard before. It wasn't static. It wasn't wind. It was something else. A pattern. A message, maybe. Faint and incomplete, but definitely not random. Rachel stared at the radio, then at the cave, her heart pounding. Whatever this was, it had just made contact. And in that moment, standing at the edge of a mystery buried for 6 long years, they realized they were no longer just exploring the wilderness. They were uncovering something much older, much deeper, and possibly something that was never meant to be found. The question now was no longer what happened to Emily Reese. The question was, what did she find before she vanished? And with that signal growing stronger, it seemed they were about to find out. The team stood in a tense circle, the only sound being the soft beeping from the radio still picking up that strange pulse. It was steady, now low, rhythmic, and almost too perfect to be natural. Rachel crouched beside the radio, adjusting the dial with careful fingers. Every time she tried to pinpoint the source, the signal shifted slightly, like it was reacting to her. The others watched, some with growing fascination, others with unease. They had expected a weekend of hiking and amateur science, maybe a few odd readings, and a good story for their online forum. None of them had signed up for this to understand why this moment felt so heavy. You had to know who Emily Reese was and what the Appalachian Mountains had kept hidden all these years. Emily wasn't just any hiker. She was well known in certain circles, respected for her solo treks across the most challenging terrain. She was cautious but curious, always drawn to places that didn't make sense, spots where compasses spun for no reason or birds avoided flying overhead. Her blog, now archived but still found by those who search hard enough, was filled with strange encounters and subtle warnings. In one of her last entries before disappearing, she mentioned a deep humming sound she'd heard in the woods, and wrote that it felt like the mountain was breathing. That blog post was dated just 3 days before her signal went dark. Rachel had read that post years ago. It was one of the reasons she never forgot Emily's name. She'd grown up hearing the stories about these mountain tales passed down by locals that outsiders often laughed off. Stories about old mines sealed shut without explanation. Whispers of strange lights seen from the ridgelines at night, and the eerie sensation of being watched when alone too deep in the trees. It wasn't just folklore. Rangers occasionally spoke off record about places they refused to go after dark. And this cave, the one now pulsing with a strange electromagnetic rhythm, sat right in the middle of one of those places. By late morning, the group had prepped the drone with a small camera and light. They decided it was safer to send it in than risk crawling into the narrow, unstable passage themselves. As the device hovered forward, the signal grew louder, crackling softly in their earbuds. The video feed flickered at first, struggling with a weak connection, but soon the tunnel came into view. It was tighter than they expected, more of a crevice than a cave, but it widened a few meters in. The walls shimmered slightly, coated in a fine dust that seemed to react to the drone's light. And then the drone dipped slightly, as if pulled. The operator tried to steady it, but the feed glitched, and then silence. Total signal loss. Everyone stared at the blank screen. No one said anything for a long time. Rachel finally broke the silence. It didn't crash. Something disrupted the signal. She didn't say what everyone else was thinking, but it was there. Something inside that cave didn't want them looking further. With the drone gone, they reviewed the short footage they'd managed to record. Frame by frame, they watched the walls flicker, and in one particular second, the thermal overlay showed something that didn't make sense of shape, human-sized just beyond the drone's light. But it didn't move like a person. It was there, then gone without any sound or motion. The shape's heat signature was colder than the surroundings, which made no logical sense. Rachel froze the image, staring at the frame. "That's not a shadow," she whispered. They decided not to go back into the cave that day. They needed better equipment, more light, more eyes. As night approached, they huddled around a small fire, their earlier excitement replaced with quiet anxiety. The forest around them felt different now. Every snapping twig in the distance made heads turn. Their EMF meters still picked up intermittent spikes, but the signal had faded after the drone disappeared. They tried to tell themselves it was a glitch or interference, but deep down, everyone felt it. Something was watching. Later that night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She sat just outside her tent, listening. That's when she heard a soft, echoing tone, far off, like a faint chime buried under the earth. She stood and followed it, a few steps into the dark, holding her breath. The sound pulsed again, and then she saw a barely noticeably tiny flicker of light near the cave entrance. It wasn't fire, and it wasn't a flashlight. It shimmered like it was alive, then vanished. Rachel backed away slowly, heart pounding in the morning. They found something new. Near the edge of their camp, where no one remembered walking, were 3 small indentations in the soil. They were in a straight line, evenly spaced, as if something had stood there and then walked off into the forest. The impressions were strange, not quite footprints, but they weren't random either. Whatever left them was deliberate. They debated leaving, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were closer to something important, something Emily may have found before she disappeared. She pulled out an old printed map, one that showed forgotten trails and landmarks long removed from public versions. A small marking faint and nearly rubbed off caught her eye. It was a hand-drawn circle labeled only D4. She didn't know what it meant, but it was less than a mile from the cave. If Emily had used this map, it was possible she'd gone there too. The group agreed to hike toward the D4, marking before making any decisions about continuing or leaving. As they packed their gear, one of the team members, Jordan, found something tucked inside a rotting log near the cave. It was a fragment of fabric, weathered and dirty, but clearly man-made. And stitched in the corner was a faded patch. It took Rachel only seconds to recognize it. It was part of Emily Reese's hiking jacket. Everything changed after that. They weren't chasing rumors anymore. They weren't looking for signals out of boredom or curiosity. Now it was personal. Emily had been there. She had reached this place. And the fact that this piece of her gear was buried so close to the cave meant one thing: she had gone in. The team pressed on in silence, their nerves tight. Whatever was in these woods, it wasn't finished with them yet. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier with each step, and somewhere ahead, buried in stone and shadow, the mountain waited. What they didn't know yet was that the signal they'd picked up wasn't the first. It wasn't even the strongest. It was only the beginning. They moved cautiously through the trees, stepping over twisted roots and ducking under low branches as they followed the trail toward the old map's D4 marking. The forest was different, here quieter, heavier, like the air itself had weight. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by something physical, but something deeper. Jordan stayed close behind, his eyes scanning the treetops, while the others kept their focus low to the ground. Every so often, someone would check the EMF meter or glance back toward the fading outline of the cave. But no one spoke much. They were all thinking the same thing. If Emily had come this way 6 years ago and left behind that torn piece of jacket, what else had she left behind? About half a mile in, they reached a break in the trees and found what looked like the remains of a man-made structure. Stone walls, half collapsed and buried under moss, surrounded by uneven ground. It wasn't listed on any modern map, but it wasn't just a pile of rocks. Rachel knelt beside a corner and brushed away the dirt. The stones had markings, some old, maybe even ancient, and some newer, like someone had scratched them with metal. Tools. One symbol repeated more than once. A simple spiral inside a triangle. No one recognized it, but it looked deliberate. While the others spread out to inspect the site, Rachel opened her journal and copied the symbol. Then flipped through Emily's archived blog entries on her phone. There it was. In a 2019 post titled, "The Spiral Gate," Emily had mentioned seeing something similar carved into trees and rocks near an unnamed cave system. She wrote about a strange pattern of animal behavior in the area: birds flying in circles overhead, deer refusing to pass certain spots. It hadn't made much sense at the time. Now, it felt like a trail of BREAD CRUMBS. Back at the ruins, Jordan found what looked like the rusted frame of an old metal hatch, mostly hidden under leaves and moss. It wasn't large, maybe just enough for a person to squeeze through. There were heavy scratches on the metal, as if something had tried to open it from the inside. No one wanted to say that out loud, but they all noticed it. Even the air around. It was off, slightly cooler, and with a faint hum, like a low vibration just at the edge of hearing. As they debated opening it, another subplot began to unfold, one that none of them expected. A second group of hikers arrived at their location, claiming to be researchers from a nearby university. They said they were conducting a geological survey, but something about them felt off. Their clothes were too clean, their equipment too advanced, and they seemed far too interested in what Rachel's team had found. One of them, a man named Gray, kept asking about the cave and the EMF readings, but never explained how he even knew about them. Later that evening, while setting up camp near the ruins, Rachel caught Gray speaking into a small earpiece he was giving updates to someone, mentioning the hatch, the markings, and even referencing Subject Echo. That's when Rachel realized this wasn't just about a lost hiker anymore. Someone else had been tracking this mystery too. And whatever they were here for, it wasn't for exploration. It was for containment. Rachel quietly shared what she'd overheard with Jordan and another team member, Lena. The three of them agreed to keep their discoveries quiet for now. If Gray and his people were watching them, they needed to stay one step ahead. The spiral symbol, the strange signal, the hatchet was all connected. And they weren't the only ones following the trail Emily had left behind. That night, as a fog rolled in, Rachel reviewed more of Emily's notes, trying to piece together the timeline. In her final entries, Emily had mentioned vivid dreams, visions of a dark place, filled with whispers where time didn't move normally. She'd written about a sensation of being pulled toward something buried and waiting. She wasn't scared in her writing. She sounded drawn to it, obsessed maybe. And then her blog had ended, just like that. No goodbye, just silence. A storm rolled in around midnight, and the forest came alive with sound. Rain pelted the tents, and lightning cracked overhead. That's when the signal returned. Louder this time. Came through the radios, the EMF meters, and even their phones' sharp bursts of sound, followed by moments of silence. Then, out of nowhere, one of the devices began playing back a distorted voice. At first, it was too broken to understand. But after a few seconds, the words became clearer. Help. Still here. Beneath, the voice didn't sound artificial. It didn't sound like interference. It sounded human. And it sounded like Emily. The next morning, the hatch was open. No one had touched it. At least, not from their group. The metal cover lay at an angle, tilted upward, dirt freshly scattered around it. Rachel stared at the opening for a long time. Before stepping closer, the interior was pitch black, but it wasn't empty. A faint, pulsing blue light flickered from deep inside, barely visible, like it was calling from the bottom of a well. Jordan wanted to go in, but Rachel stopped him. "We're not ready," she said. "Whatever's down there, it's been waiting a long time. We go in without a plan. We might not come back." The second group, Gray and his team, didn't show up that morning. Their camp was still there. But they were gone. No notes, no gear missing, just vanished. Lena found a strange metal device left behind in the grass near their tents. It was small, no buttons or markings, but when she picked it up, it vibrated softly in her hand. It felt warm. Everything was unraveling now. The original mystery, what happened to Emily, had splintered into something far bigger. Something ancient, hidden, and not entirely explainable. The Appalachian Mountains had always held secrets, but this felt different. The signals, the markings, the light. Even the altered wildlife behavior, they were signs of something buried deeper than any cave. Rachel believed Emily had found the source. And now it was opening again. The team decided to hold off one more night, to gather what they could and prepare to descend into the hatch. Rachel wasn't sure what they would find, but she had the feeling Emily was still down there. Not just a memory, not just a mystery, but a presence. The forest was still again. No birds, no insects, no wind, only the signal, growing stronger. The night before their descent into the hatch was the longest any of them had ever known. Sleep came in short, anxious bursts, and even when they managed to close their eyes, the dreams that followed were strange. Rachel kept seeing the same image over and over again: a tunnel, endlessly twisting, lined with pulsing lights and symbols that felt familiar, even though she'd never seen them before. She heard whispers too, voices that weren't threatening. Exactly, but insistent, like something trying to be heard from the other side. At dawn, the mist hung thick over the forest, wrapping the trees in a pale shroud. The hatch gaped open in the ground, dark and waiting. The spiral symbol was now visible on the inner metal surface, as though the rain had washed away layers of grime that had hidden it for years. No one said much during breakfast. There was a quiet understanding between them. Myth, they went in. Things might not be the same afterward. Rachel checked their equipment again. 2 EMF meters, a thermal camera, two-way radios, portable lights, and a backup power pack. Jordan had managed to rig a rope system to help them descend safely into what looked like a narrow vertical shaft. Lena carried a small drone with limited range, just in case. They'd done everything they could to prepare. But none of them really knew what waited below. As Rachel clipped into the rope and started her descent, the temperature dropped fast. The shaft was tighter than expected, forcing her to turn sideways at points to squeeze through. My walls were damp and coated in a fine, chalky residue. After what felt like an eternity of slow movement, her boots finally touched solid ground. The space opened into a chamber barely large enough for all three of them. Jordan followed next, then Lena. The chamber was unlike anything they had seen. The walls were smooth stone, curved into unnatural angles, almost like they had been carved from a single massive boulder. Strange markings covered every surface: lines, spirals, and wave-like symbols, faintly glowing with a bluish light that seemed to pulse in sync with their own heartbeats. There were no signs of decay, no roots breaking through the rock, no mold or mildew. It was untouched by time. Rachel moved forward slowly, EMF meter in hand. The readings were off the charts, fluctuating rapidly between normal and extreme spikes. The signal they had been tracking was strongest here, almost vibrating through the floor. As they explored deeper into the passage beyond the chamber, a humming sound began to grow, low and deep, vibrating through their bones, It wasn't painful, but it wasn't comfortable either. It felt like something was responding to their presence. They passed what looked like an archway, and that's when the temperature dropped again, sudden and sharp, like stepping into a freezer. The thermal camera flickered, then displayed a shape ahead, just out of view. It was tall, human-sized, but distorted. The heat signature was strange cold, yet sharply defined, almost as if the thing radiated anti-heat. They froze. Rachel reached for the radio and whispered into it, "We're not alone." The shape moved slowly, steadily disappearing around the curve of the passage. They couldn't follow it fast. The air was getting heavier, and the walls started to narrow again. Jordan took the lead, his light sweeping side to side. The markings grew more complex here, forming patterns that looked like constellations or coded maps. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt like a story, some kind of message etched into the walls long before any of them were born. Then they saw it at the end of the tunnel. Behind a thin curtain of hanging roots and vines was a chamber unlike the first. In the center stood what looked like an ancient structure, part stone, part metal, shaped like a wide podium with ridges along its base. And resting on top of it was a weathered backpack. It was unmistakable. Rachel stepped forward, her heart racing. The name stitched into the fabric was faded, but still legible. Eerie. None of them spoke. The pack looked undisturbed, like it had been placed there carefully, not dropped or abandoned. Inside, they found a notebook, its pages stiff and dry, but still readable. Rachel flipped through quickly, scanning the handwritten notes. The first few pages were journal entries, food rations, hiking conditions, trail notes. Then it changed. Emily had written about the signal, how it began as a vibration under her feet, and grew louder the closer she got to the cave. She mentioned dreams and waking visions of a figure always standing just ahead of her, disappearing when she approached. The deeper she went, the more disconnected from time she became. She wasn't sure how long she'd been underground. Her watch stopped working. Days and nights lost meaning. She wrote that the cave was alive, that it listened. The final entry was dated, but the year was wrong, marked as 2025. Though Emily had disappeared in 2019, there were no signs of delusion in her writing. She sounded calm, focused. Her last words were chilling. "I think I've become part of it now. Not trapped, just different. If someone finds this, listen to the sound. It will tell you where to go, but only if you're willing to see." Suddenly, the humming intensified. The ground beneath them vibrated gently, and a low light began to glow from the floor beneath the structure. A circular pattern emerged, made of faintly etched lines that mirrored the spiral triangle symbol from earlier. Rachel stepped back, stunned, as the pattern began to rotate slowly. The EMF meter in her hand shorted out, flickering before going dead. Then they heard it. A voice, clear and soft, echoing through the tunnel from the direction they'd come. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't distorted. It was Emily's voice. "Rachel." Everyone froze. Rachel turned slowly, her eyes wide. Her name had been spoken clearly, with the exact tone of someone who recognized her. But there was no one there. Just the passage. Quiet again. Jordan moved toward the exit tunnel, but stopped. "We're not going back that way," he said. "Look." The tunnel was changing. The vines were growing thicker, the walls pulsing with the same glow they'd seen earlier. The way out was still there, but it was closing. Rachel felt something she hadn't let herself feel until that moment. Fear not of being lost. Not even of what might be down here, but of what might already be inside them. They weren't just visitors anymore. They had stepped into something alive, something watching, something old. And now it knew their names. The signal was no longer just a sound, it was an invitation, or maybe a warning. And there was no turning back. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the echo of her name faded into the glowing walls around them. For a moment, none of them moved. The signal had shifted, no longer just electromagnetic interference or pulses of static, but something intelligent. Something conscious. Her name hadn't been broadcast, it had been spoken. Lena slowly lowered the camera and whispered, "That was Emily. It had to be." Rachel wanted to believe it, but a sharp knot of dread formed in her chest, or something pretending to be her. The walls continued to pulse with that dim blue light, and the spiral pattern beneath the stone platform now spun faster, casting flickering shadows that danced across the chamber. The air had changed too. It was denser, warmer, and strangely charged, like standing beneath a power line. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, was heavy, like holding your breath underwater, waiting to break the surface then, just when. Rachel was about to step away from the platform. The light beneath their feet surged and revealed something else, more symbols. But these weren't spirals. They were coordinates, etched in a perfect ring around the base. Jordan bent down and read them aloud, and Rachel's heart dropped. They didn't point to their current location. They pointed to 3 others. One was somewhere deep in the Alaskan tundra, another in the heart of the Sahara, and the third, frighteningly close to home, was in West Virginia, not more than 60 miles from where Emily had first disappeared. Lena's eyes widened. This isn't the only site. The realization hit all 3 of them at once. Whatever they'd found here wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was part of something larger, much larger. And if this one had been broadcasting a signal for years, then so were the others, before they could process it further. A loud crack sounded behind them, sharp and unnatural, like something splitting open. They spun around, lights raised, but there was no visible movement. The sound came from deeper within the cave, beyond a narrow tunnel that hadn't been there before. The stone wall had shifted, revealing an opening just wide enough for a person to pass through. More markings lined the new passage, different from before. These weren't spirals. These were jagged, angular symbols that felt rushed, panicked, desperate. Against her better judgment, Rachel stepped closer and scanned the passage with her light. The tunnel dropped slightly downward and curved hard to the right, out of sight. Just as she turned to ask Jordan what he thought, their radios crackled again. But this time, it wasn't Emily's voice. It was Gray. "Rachel, you need to leave. Now, you don't understand what this place is." The signal broke in and out, fragmented but clear enough to catch the fear in his voice. He wasn't speaking calmly. He was panicked. There was background noise, clanking, rushing wind. What sounded like alarms, but his words cut through. They found the West Virginia site. It's active. Whatever's under there, it's waking up. The transmission ended with a metallic screech before silence fell again. Rachel stared at the radio, stunned. They hadn't seen Gray or his team since that morning. But now it sounded like they had gone to the other site. And something had gone horribly wrong. Lena's voice trembled. "Did he say it's waking up? What does that mean?" Rachel didn't have an answer, but the fear in Gray's voice was genuine. Whatever mystery they were chasing had just grown teeth. Suddenly, the platform behind them lit up again, but this time it didn't glow blue. It pulsed red. All 3 of them turned as a loud hum filled the chamber. The temperature dropped sharply, and the glowing spiral began to fracture, splitting into jagged cracks. The structure began to lower into the floor, revealing a dark shaft beneath it, lined with steps carved into stone. From deep below, the sound returned, not electronic this time, but organic. Like breathing, Rachel's instincts screamed to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She stared down into the opening as a faint light shimmered at the bottom, then vanished. "We need to decide right now," Jordan said. Do we follow it down or seal it up and walk away? But the second plot twist was already unraveling, because just then, Lena gasped. She was holding Emily's notebook again, flipping back through the last few entries. Her hands trembling. She didn't come down here alone. Rachel turned sharply. What? Lena pointed at a page near the back, faded but legible. A name had been scribbled into the margin. Gray. It was right there in Emily's handwriting. She had met him, not recently. 6 years ago. Jordan's voice was low. That's impossible. But deep down, they all knew what it meant. Gray hadn't just found the other site. He had been involved from the beginning. And he hadn't told them the truth. Whatever happened to Emily, he was there. Maybe even responsible. Rachel's mind reeled. The ruins, the hatch, the fake researchers. The signal, they were all part of something that had started years ago and was only now coming to light. The map, the symbols, the locations. This wasn't some lost hiker's tragic ending. It was the beginning of something global, and Emily. If she was still alive, if that voice really had been hers, what had she become? The stone steps waited. Beneath them, spiraling downward into complete darkness, and somewhere deep in the earth, the signal continued pulsing louder than ever. Rachel stood at the edge of the newly revealed shaft, staring down into the dark spiral carved into the earth. The red glow from the stone above cast long shadows over their faces, and none of them spoke for several seconds. The name in Emily's notebook. Gray had shattered what little trust they'd placed in the man. Whatever he'd told them on the radio, whatever he was running from, it was too late to turn back. Everything had led here. Jordan tested the steps first, slowly putting weight on each one. They were solid, dry, and surprisingly well-preserved. The spiral stairway led deep, much deeper than any of them expected. After descending for nearly 10 minutes in silence, the narrow stone corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling soared high above them, disappearing into darkness. Walls curved in unnatural, smooth patterns, carved with symbols that pulsed gently as if breathing. The signal here was overwhelming every device they had overloaded and shut down as soon as they entered. At the center of the chamber stood a structure that looked part machine, part sculpture. It was massive, circular, and glowing from within. Thin veins of red and blue light ran through it like flowing energy. Floating above its core was something none of them could explain, an orb. Maybe 4 feet across, hovering silently, spinning slowly as they approached. Rachel felt something pressing against her mind, not like a sound, not even like words. But a presence. It was aware of them. It had always been. She instinctively reached for Emily's notebook again, flipping to the last page. The final line in rushed handwriting read, "If it opens, don't run. Don't fight it. Listen." And that's when the orb cracked open. The light inside was blinding at first, but it quickly dimmed to a soft glow. A figure began to form within, it not entirely human, but not alien either. It shimmered like a memory. A person made of light and echo. Rachel stepped forward, and the figure sharpened. It was Emily, but she wasn't the same. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her body moved like it was caught between time and space. She looked directly at Rachel and spoke not with sound, but through a thought that filled the entire chamber. I stayed because it showed me everything. The beginning, the connection, the pattern. Lena dropped to her knees, stunned. Jordan froze. Emily continued. The signal isn't a warning. It's a message. This place. It's not from above. It's from here, older than language. Buried to protect us, not from it, but from what we might do with it. The orb pulsed again, and the chamber's floor began to shift. The glowing veins flared brightly, and the ground trembled. Rachel turned to the others. It's activating. We triggered it by finding the other sites. Emily's voice returned, fainter now. They're all connected. The sites form a map. Not for travel, but for awakening. It listens to intention. If we act with fear, it closes. If we understand, it opens. Jordan looked up at the orb. What happens if it opens completely? Number? Answer came. Suddenly, the far side of the chamber cracked open. From the shadows, Gray stepped forward, dirty, bruised, and clearly exhausted. But alive. Rachel locked eyes with him. You lied. Gray didn't deny it. We tried to shut it down years ago, but Emily didn't want that. She chose to stay. We thought she was lost, but she was changing. He stepped toward the orb and pulled a small black device from his jacket. I was sent to make sure no one activated this again. If this thing finishes waking up, the others will, too. And we have no idea what that means for the surface. Rachel stared at the device. What does that do? Gray didn't answer. He just pressed a button. A sharp frequency filled the chamber, painful, high-pitched, disorienting. The orb flickered, the veins across the floor dimmed, and Emily's form wavered like smoke in wind. Rachel ran forward and tackled Gray, knocking the device from his hand. It slid across the floor and shattered against the stone. The frequency stopped. Silence fell. Then the orb glowed brighter than before. Emily's form stabilized again, and this time she looked different, more whole. More grounded, she reached out, and Rachel stepped closer. You still have a choice, Emily said, her voice now both in their minds and the air. You can shut it down like before, or you can let it finish. Not for power, not for answers, but for understanding. Rachel looked at Jordan and Lena. They were silent, trusting her. She turned back to Emily, and with one breath, she said, Show us. The orb pulsed once more, expanding outward in a wave of soft light that swept through the chamber and into the tunnels beyond. The signal quieted. The ground stopped trembling. The light faded, leaving only stillness. They waited. Breath held. But nothing else happened. They climbed back to the surface in silence. The forest above was untouched, peaceful again. No pulsing light, no signal. It was as if the mountain had exhaled. The team packed up slowly. Gray said nothing as he walked away into the trees, disappearing for the last time. Back at camp, Rachel opened the notebook one final time. A new line had been written beneath Emily's last message, one no one had seen before. You were never supposed to find answers, only the right questions. And as Rachel looked out toward the mountains, she realized the signal had never been calling for help. It had been calling them home. The following morning, the mountain was silent. No signal. No pulsing light. No EMF spikes or distorted frequencies. Just the soft rustle of wind through the trees and the hum of birds returning to the branches above their camp. For the first time in days, it felt like the forest was simply a forest again. Peaceful, still. Rachel stood alone near the cave entrance, holding Emily's notebook in both hands. She flipped through the pages slowly, her fingers tracing the worn edges and fading ink. There was nothing new written since the last message, nothing else from Emily. And maybe that was the point. The story had always been moving toward this moment. Not answers handed out easily, but something deeper. A shift in understanding behind her. Lena packed up the last of the gear while Jordan ran a final scan with the thermal camera, though they both knew they wouldn't find anything else. The site had gone dormant again, or maybe it had just gone quiet. Not closed, not broken, just waiting. Whatever had awakened down there had shown itself, communicated in the only way it could. Through light, memory, feeling. It had responded not to technology, but to presence, curiosity, intention. Rachel thought back to what Emily had said about listening, about how the signals weren't warnings, but messages. How the ancient structures weren't meant for control, but understanding. She realized now that Emily had never been trapped. She had made a choice to stay, to become part of what was buried beneath the mountains, to learn from something most people would never even know existed. In the end, she hadn't vanished. She had transformed as they hiked back down through the forest. Rachel kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Emily standing by the trees one last time, but she never did. Still, she didn't feel grief, not in the way she expected. Emily hadn't been lost. She had become something more, and she had passed that understanding on. Once they reached the base of the ridge, they paused to rest by a stream. Jordan asked the question they'd all been circling around quietly. "What do we tell people?" Rachel looked up. "We tell the truth, that we went looking for a missing hiker and found a signal. We can share what we saw carefully, not to stir up fear, not to cause panic, but to let people know there's more to this place than anyone realized." Lena nodded. "And what about Gray?" No one answered at first. He hadn't returned after disappearing into the woods. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe he'd gone to one of the other sites. Rachel wasn't sure, but she sensed his part in this story was over, or at least it had taken a different path. Back in town, the story unfolded slowly. They submitted their footage, but left out the more inexplicable parts. The authorities reopened Emily Reese's file, but there was no body, no confirmed death, nothing concrete. Just a jacket, a notebook, and a team of explorers with a strange and unexplainable experience. The headlines focused on the rediscovered ruins and odd geological readings, enough for the public to digest. The rest remained quiet, protected but within niche forums, hiker blogs, and the deeper corners of the internet. The story spread differently. Talk of hidden cave systems, of electromagnetic signals tied to ancient structures, of glowing symbols, and repeating coordinates. Those who had followed Emily's blog years ago resurfaced. Some even claimed to hear the signal themselves on old radios, static-filled podcasts, or late-night frequencies. Rachel knew not all of it was true, but some of it probably was. Because once something like this wakes up, it never really goes back to sleep. Over the next few weeks, Rachel kept in touch with Lena and Jordan, but they had all agreed to take a step back. Not out of fear, but respect. They had gone farther than they ever expected, not just into the earth, but into something timeless. And they needed time to process that still. Rachel couldn't let go entirely. She began studying the coordinates etched around the platform, one in Alaska, one in the Sahara, and the third that Gray had visited near West Virginia. She didn't plan to visit them, not yet, but she felt drawn to them the same way Emily must have felt, as if the message hadn't ended, it had simply passed into new hands. She spent her evenings hiking nearby trails, no longer chasing signals, just listening. Not for voices, not even for signs, just for the feeling, the quiet. Knowing that something beneath the surface was aware of her and watching, but no longer hiding. The forest had changed, or maybe she had. Months later, a package arrived at Rachel's apartment. There was no return address, no note inside, just a flash drive. She plugged it in carefully, expecting nothing. What opened was a single video. Clip-grainy and unstable, dated 2025. It showed a dimly lit cavern. Clearly not the one they had entered, but similar. Symbols on the wall pulsed gently, and a single figure stood at the center of the room. It was Emily. Not the shimmer of memory they'd seen in the orb, but her whole, real, alive. She looked into the camera, calm and collected. "I'm not alone here," she said, "and neither are you. When you're ready, come back. But don't bring fear. Bring questions." The video ended. Rachel sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. Her heart beat steady, not panicked, not overwhelmed. Just full. There was nothing left to explain. No need to prove what had happened. The message had been received. The story of the hiker who vanished in the Appalachians had always sounded like the beginning of a mystery. But now Rachel understood, was the beginning of something far greater. A story not about disappearance, but discovery. About listening when the world tells you to ignore. About following signals most people never hear. And above all, about connection. The mountains remained silent now, but the signal was still out there, carried in echoes, waiting in the earth, whispering not for help, but for understanding. And this time, someone was finally listening.